Go ahead and turning on over to Kelly Davidson. She is a assistant professor up on main campus. She's going to talk to you guys about nitrogen modeling tools.
All right. Well, I want to start by thanking you all for the opportunity to be here and thank you, Nate, for the invitation. This feels like a full circle moment for me. I grew up on a farm in Northwest Ohio, corn and soybeans and cattle, and I grew up going to extension meetings with my family. So it's exciting to be here on the other side and get to present to you today, and I thank you for your time. We're going to talk about in-season nitrogen modeling tools. Over the last few years, you've probably gotten things in the mail from me, seen me at Commodity Classic and other places trying to recruit you to do some surveys. And I'm excited to present the outcome of some of those surveys, but I also want to glean some information from you to help me interpret some of the results we're finding. So farmer adoption of in-season nitrogen modeling tools. Why is it important? As you all know, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has done a lot of research about water quality in the Chesapeake Bay, nutrient loading, and things that nutrient is impacting the quality of the water in the Chesapeake Bay. Approximately 247.6 million pounds of nitrogen entered the bay in 2023. It's an ongoing problem and ongoing initiatives to try to help solve this problem. And I'm sure, as you all are familiar, oftentimes agriculture gets pointed to a source point of pollution in the bay. And you're here to, one of the perks of being here is you're going to get your nutrient management credits, right? Estimates suggest that agriculture accounts for approximately 45% of the nitrogen loading in the bay. And while rates are decreasing, there's still cause for concern. So this work was, on the first slide I showed our funding agencies of the Nature Conservancy, the Mid-Atlantic 4R Alliance, and the USDA NRCS. And the first line of research that we did was looking at adoption of the 4R nutrient management suite of tools, 4R nutrient stewardship, which is applying the right nutrient source at the right rate, the right time, and the right place. One of those practices is what we're going to hone on in today, is the in-season nitrogen modeling tools. Despite increasing promotion of the 4R practices, hopefully some of you have heard of them, there's not been the widespread adoption that we're hoping for in this region. And adoption has been, there's concern that we're still not meeting those goals for nutrient loading goals for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So one of the 4R practices is the use of in-season nitrogen modeling tools, which are software platforms that recommend nitrogen rates based on historical weather patterns, current weather patterns, historical soil types, and other factors on an on-farm basis. Raise your hand if you've heard of in-season nitrogen modeling tools. Some, okay. So that's what we're focusing on today. We've honed in on a couple of studies to look at adoption of nitrogen modeling tools and use. And as Nate was talking about doing a simulation with grain marketing, we love to do simulations at the University of Delaware. And so I'll present both the results of a mail survey as well as one of the economic experiments or simulations that some of you might have participated on. On that note, we greatly appreciate your involvement in our studies of the University of Delaware. And I want to say thank you very much to all of you who have engaged over the last few years. So I'll start with the mail survey that we did, looking at what factors are important in the adoption of nitrogen modeling tools, and what are some perceived barriers, both among adopters and non-adopters. This is work that was led by my graduate student at the University of Delaware, Manisha Shrestha. She is wrapping up her thesis and will be graduating this semester. Very proud of her. And also with Dr. Leah Palm-Forster, who some of you may know as well. So our research question in this study was to identify what factors are important in the adoption of, it was really about 4R practices in general, but one of the focal points of the survey was about the in-season nitrogen modeling tools. The brand name for that we often refer to as Adapt-In. So you might have heard of Adapt-In. Granular was a former service. But first off, what are the factors, economic implications, environmental factors, and time in the decision to adopt nitrogen modeling tools? How do those factors affect the adoption, both current adoption and likelihood of future adoption of nitrogen modeling tools? And then what are some perceived barriers? Why are farmers not choosing to adopt these tools? What are some conceptions about the tools? And then how do those perceived barriers impact the adoption? I have the regression results at the end of my slides, but I don't typically tend to show them in non-academic audiences. But if you want to see the numbers, we can pull those up. So for data collection, you may remember you got this thick packet in the mail, a mail survey in 2021, 2022, the winter of 21-22, about the 4R practices in general. And again, one of the focal points of the survey was about nitrogen modeling tools. We mailed to 2,700 farmers in Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. And we sourced those lists. If you're curious why you get these things in the mail, we sourced the list for Delaware from the nutrient management list of people who've had registered plans in the state of Delaware. And we also looked at pesticide applications, I think in Pennsylvania and Maryland is where we got those lists. So we mailed a survey, the mail survey that you could complete by hand and mail back to us, but also with a QR code to participate online if you preferred to do an online version of the study. We specifically targeted corn, soybeans, and small grain growers for this particular study. And you had to be the primary decision maker and at least 18 years of age. As compensation for this particular study, we did a drawing of gift cards. So we had different numbers of Visa gift cards up to $250 as a thank you for participating in the survey. Our questions of interest were about adoption and then also those important factors and barriers, and I'll come to those. But in terms of adoption, we asked, what is your current experience with in-season nitrogen modeling tools? Options being, I've never used it, I've used it in the past but no longer use it, I've adopted it on at least half of, or on less than half of my acres, or I currently use the practice on at least half of my acres or more. And so looking at different scales of use, experience, and adoption in that question. Then we also asked, what is the likelihood that you would adopt it in the future, regardless of whether you're a current adopter or not? Not likely, somewhat likely, or very likely. And with an option if you've already kind of fully invested in this practice, not available, I already use this practice. To determine how important different factors are, and again, we were interested in particular about economic factors and environmental factors, and I'll say this now, I'll probably say it again. We went through extensive conversations both with the Nature Conservancy and 4R Alliance, literature review, and some pre-testing with farmers to decide what these survey questions should look like. So that's how we kind of determined this possible list. We also did semi-structured phone interviews, so that you may remember talking to some of my undergrads on the phone, and focus group discussions as well to design this survey. So quite a bit of input from you all and consultation with our partners on the ground. So we asked how important are different factors on a scale of not at all to very important in the decision to implement in-season nitrogen modeling tools. And the factors that we came up with through those focus groups, interviews, and consultations were crop yields, input cost, profitability, time spent in the field, time spent on farm management decisions, soil health and productivity on the farm, environmental quality in your community, and compliance with government regulation. You guys can tell me if I missed any. I do want feedback on this. And then we also had conversations about, well, what are perceived barriers? And a lot of this came from our engagement with the 4R Alliance. You know, they've been on the ground engaging with farmers quite a bit. And so we went back and forth about what could be some perceptions that are keeping us from adopting these tools. Finding information, having time to learn about the practice, economic concerns such as getting a return on investment or the cost of implementing the practice, difficulty implementing the practice because of timing and weather. That's a little bit less important for nitrogen modeling tools and more for something like split nitrogen application. Having the right equipment and technology could be barriers. Finding services, again with information. And then some generic beliefs, believing that maybe I'm too small of a farmer to use this practice. It's better suited for larger farmers. It's difficult to implement on leased land. Maybe I tried it and I had a bad experience with it, so I don't use it anymore. And then just general, I'd rather use my rule of thumb that I've done for decades and more familiar with, or I believe that technologies are too difficult to use. So getting into some results, what does current adoption look like? 65% of our farmers that we surveyed had never used in-season nitrogen modeling tools, so again, like Adapta or Granular, on their acreage. About 20% are currently using partial adoption. They've got some acres some of their farms where they use nitrogen modeling tools. 11% said kind of even more partial adoption, not using on all of their acres, but some. And then 4% had used in the past, but are no longer adopting the tool. 58% said that they were not likely to adopt the tool in the future. And so that really begs our question that we're diving into, well, why not, right? What are the factors that are contributing to that decision not to adopt? 29% said they were somewhat likely, and 13% said very likely. So a snapshot of who participated in terms of demographic and descriptive statistics. Our average age of our farmer was 60 years old, which is representative of farmers in the 4 states that we surveyed. Our cropland was a little large, so our average farm size was 642 acres. So the larger farmers in general filled out our survey, and 39% of our sample had at least more than half of their farm acreage. So we're predominantly leased land farmers. I glazed over, you might have saw on an earlier slide, we had about 360 responses, but some of those were not actual farmers or weren't eligible for the survey. And so usable responses, we're talking about a sample of 204 farmers here. Okay, so I apologize for the small font. Basically, this takeaway is that economic factors are showing out, not surprisingly, as important factors in the decision to adopt. This is that scale question, asking how important are the following factors in your decision to adopt nitrogen modeling tools. Profitability came up number 1, very important to moderately important. Over 90% said moderately to very important profitability is in the decision to adopt. But then also soil health and productivity. So some environmental concerns, some stewardship of the land concerns being very important. Input costs and crop yields are up there. And then time, which I'll come back to later, was really only moderately important. Time spent on learning about the product as well as on farm management decisions. Perceived barriers, also maybe not surprisingly, equipment came out strong as a perceived barrier. About 84% of farmers reported that having the right equipment was a barrier to adoption. So probably thinking about if you get different nitrogen rate recommendations on different parts of the field or different fields, being able to do that variable rate application. 82% reported cost as a barrier in the use of nitrogen modeling tools. And And then a little bit less important was there were fewer people that had a negative experience with the using the practice in the past, as well as some of those beliefs about new technology being difficult or difficulty implementing it on leased land. So we took the responses from the survey and did some statistical analysis known as a factor analysis, which basically groups responses to the survey in terms of responses that would be correlated, so that we could take all of these multiple questions that you answered and kind of summarize them into nice groupings of what those factors are pointing to be able to do a little bit more of like understanding impacts. So the important factors that came out, I like to say we must have designed our survey really well because these were really clean outcomes that we got. Basically, we could break down the responses into economic factors, environmental factors, and time. So that's sort of what we hypothesized coming in, and that's what the data is showing as well, how these responses group. So farmers are thinking about the economics of investing in these tools, whether the tools are going to benefit soil health and productivity and environmental quality, and then also the time that it takes to invest in using these tools. In terms of barriers, equipment and technology lumped together, economic and biological kind of came together in terms of getting a return on investment and the cost of application, but also that question about difficulty implementing due to timing and weather and all of the other factors that you face in farming. Information came out as a perceived barrier, so finding information about the product and beliefs kind of grouped together as well in terms of preferring familiar technologies and feeling that new technologies are difficult to use. So again, that's saying that like farmers that answered that those were high barriers believed both of those instances, that it was they prefer to use familiar technologies as well as there's a belief that new technologies are difficult to use. So we took these factors from our factor analysis and we put them into a regression to look at the correlation between the important factors, the perceived barriers, and likelihood of adoption in the future, as well as current adoption status. So telling us how do these factors affect the current adoption of nitrogen modeling tools, as well as the likelihood that a farmer will adopt in the future. And what we found to be significant, again, not surprising, is that economics are important. So people that believe that economic factors are more important in the decision to adopt are less likely to adopt nitrogen modeling tools. So there may be some hangups around believing that it's going to make my farm more profitable or the cost of implementation. I can tell you in the next study that we'll present, the cost of using these tools runs about $6 per acre. So it's not an insignificant cost. But where I'm going to pause and ask for your feedback is the correlation between consideration of time and adoption of the tools. So farmers that consider time to be more important, and again, time spent learning about the practice as well as making farm management decisions in the tool, farmers who believe time to be important are more likely to adopt or either currently being adopting or more likely to adopt in the future the nitrogen modeling tools. And so we're doing some follow-ups. Some of you may be on our list of current phone calls. We're doing a qualitative study with phone interviews to ask farmers a little bit more, I think specifically in the state of Delaware, to ask more about use of nitrogen modeling tools and perceptions. And we've added a question to ask about this relationship between time and adoption. But I want to put it out to you guys for a minute. I'll pause here. Help me decipher that. Why, if we believe that time is important, would we be more likely to adopt the nitrogen modeling tool? It's not a quiz. My dad, who's still farming, had the hypothesis that maybe there's a correlation between time and value. If it takes a lot of time, you believe it to be more valuable, and then therefore you'd be more likely to invest. I could buy that.
Could be the amount of time it takes to get to that point versus the amount of time you can save time.
Right? Okay, so kind of an upfront cost, but then you save time later. Yeah. Which I could see because it's giving you a recommendation, so it should save some of your time thinking about it. Okay, so we can chat after. I'll keep going, but the other thing that came out was the perceived barrier about information was strong. How do I find out about this product? And so farmers who perceived there to be an information barrier were actually more likely to adopt in the future. No, probably now they've got some information about it. Okay, and then moving on to our second study. So that was our mail survey. You've seen me at Delaware Ag Week and Commodity Classic and some other events, Penn State Ag Progress Days. We've been all around recruiting farmers for our adoption of the nitrogen modeling tool study, which we called a framed field experiment. Some people like to call it a game, some people call it a simulation, but we've got our computers set out, and we're asking you to make decisions about the nitrogen modeling tools. This work was in collaboration with our postdoctoral scholar, Baudry Canal, who has moved on and now works for the State of Delaware Department of Finance. We're very proud of him. My co-author is Dr. Leah Palm-Forrester, and some extension academics that you may know very well, Amy Schober, Jared Miller, Nicole Figliorino at University of Maryland, and Charlie White at Penn State. And this portion of the research was what was funded by the USDA NRCS. So our research questions here, raise your hand if you participated in this study. I'm curious if anybody did the computer simulations. A couple heads nodding, great. So what we were trying to understand while having you go through the simulation was to understand the role of information. So particularly information about private benefits such as profitability and yield, compared to public benefits is what we would call information about environmental services, water quality, and carbon emissions. So if you participated, I think we're done now, so we can talk about this. We had 4 different videos that participants watched. And I'll come back to what was in those 4 videos in a moment. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But then we were also asking, how do nitrogen side dress rates apply given information about environmental benefits? Coming back to that question about the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So again, this was an in-person and online study. We mailed out invitations to participate online with a QR code and a link to the survey. And then we also recruited heavily in person. We didn't get a great response rate from the mailed survey to participate online, so we started to go to farm shows with our computer set up and had some meetings, and Delaware Ag Week in particular was very successful. But it was a framed field experiment is what we call this, or a simulation, with farmers again in Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. At the time of these results that I'm going to show you, we had 267 farmers participating. We have recently, cheers, celebrating big time that we finally obtained all 400 responses that we were looking for. So now we have a sample of 400 farmers, and these results will update a little bit, but shouldn't change drastically with that addition. Again, it was in-person and online participation. And this study was incentivized. We wanted to make it as realistic as possible, and so you were able to earn profits in the study, revenues based on your decisions in the study. And so the survey paid, I don't remember what the minimum was, but up to $150, depending on decisions in the study. So we had 4 different informational videos that in our experimental world we call treatments. And 3 treatments and 1 control. So the control group just received information about nitrogen modeling tools, just baseline information, what they are, how they work. One of our 4 videos had information about what we consider to be more local environmental benefits of using the nitrogen modeling tools, and that had to do with water quality, so improving water quality. I don't remember if we specifically mentioned the Chesapeake Bay, but in local waterways. Our second video had what we refer to as global benefits, thinking about less direct and more wide-reaching environmental benefits, so, specifically focusing on nitrous oxide emissions and how those emissions can be reduced by relying on the in-season nitrogen modeling tools. And then our third video gave both the information about water quality as well as the information about nitrous oxide. So both having to do with the message being reductions in nitrogen rates or more optimal nitrogen rates can improve water quality and reduce nitrous oxide emissions. So by having these 4 different groups, and our farmers were randomly assigned to the 4 different groups, we're able to compare decisions between people who saw information about just the water quality compared to people who just saw baseline information about nitrogen modeling tools, and so on. People who saw information about nitrous oxide emissions compared to, we're always comparing to the control. So you can measure the impact of information by looking at the differences in decisions of the treatment compared to the control. These videos were graciously prepared by University of Delaware Extension, had a large hand in making our videos very pretty, with input from our research team, the Delaware, Maryland, and Penn State faculty. Okay, so this graphic just guides you through the experiments. Basically, we set up a hypothetical field. So farmers got information about a 100-acre cornfield, and they received information about soil, weather, crop, and different application info about a hypothetical farm. So the decisions were incentivized with real dollars, but the farm, you weren't actually applying anything on your farm. It's a simulation where you're making decisions about this particular field. Getting the right information took a lot of back and forth with our colleagues, especially thinking about Delaware soils compared to Pennsylvania soils. So we landed somewhere in between when we were talking about our farm, but we made sure that to give farmers as much information as we could to make an educated decision about these nitrogen modeling tools. So you were introduced to a hypothetical field that you would be making a decision on. You watched the videos, one of those 4 videos that we had in place. You only watched 1 video that was, I think, about 7 minutes in length. And then we started to ask you to make decisions about nitrogen side dress applications. First and foremost, we just took a baseline. Here's this field. How much nitrogen would you apply? We gave information about like pre-planting application and things that you would need to know. And so the scale was from 0 to 250 pounds per acre of commercial nitrogen. Just without recommendation of the tool, what would you apply to this field? Then participants were offered the option to purchase the in-season nitrogen modeling tool recommendation. And so that was a yes or no decision. Would you like to purchase this tool for $6 an acre? That's coming out of your pot of money that you were playing with in this simulation. At $6 an acre, would you purchase this tool to receive a recommendation? And then if you said yes, the recommendation, the nitrogen modeling tool offered a nitrogen rate recommendation, and you had the opportunity to revise your decided rate based on that recommendation, or you could stick with your own rule of thumb and use the rate that you initially decided that you would apply. After that decision, so you kind of confirm, no, I'd like to change my rate, or confirm keeping the rate that I decided on. It's where it kind of got fun. If you did this, you actually got outcomes, so profitability and yield, based on your decision, your decided nitrogen rates. Those outcomes were developed largely in cooperation with Penn State University, who has a large database of historical weather data, soil characteristics, and yield. And so each round, the outcomes were based on historical data from a real year. So that was kind of fun. Participants made 8 rounds of decisions, the same thing. So how much would you apply? Would you like to purchase a tool? Would you like to change your rates? I'm really excited to present the results, basically because you guys are doing a great job, which you know. So the results are showing in the first round, this is decision to purchase a tool or not. The left bar is a 0 for would not purchase the nitrogen modeling tool, and the right bar is a 1, meaning that they decided to purchase the nitrogen modeling tool. So what we really see here is that there's initial excitement. You watch this video, you learn about the tool, and in that first round, a large majority of the farmers participating, so over 150 out of the 276 in this sample, decided yes, they want that recommended rate. They're willing to purchase the nitrogen modeling tool recommendation. In the second round, that decreased quite a bit, and then it kind of levels out, and some are deciding to purchase, some are not. And then in the final round, there's a little bit of another peak of purchasing the nitrogen modeling tool. These graphs show the nitrogen rate decisions that were made. So how much would you apply at side dress for each of the 8 rounds? And I hope you can see the red line is what the nitrogen modeling tool recommended. The blue line is the rate, the average rate that the participating farmer decided to apply, and then the bars are the distribution. So like you're kind of hovering around the same amount. Most farmers are hovering there at around 150 pounds per acre. What's good, and why I said you guys are doing a great job, is because you're applying, farmers were deciding to apply lower rates even than what the nitrogen modeling tool recommended. That was a bit surprising to us. We assumed that the baseline rates would be higher than the nitrogen modeling tool recommendation, but actually our participating farmers were more conservative in their nitrogen side dress rates. Except in round 2, the participating rate was slightly higher than the recommended rate by the nitrogen modeling tool. And again, just remembering that each round, I should have pointed out, not only did you get private benefits, so profitability and yield outcomes, but in the different treatment groups, there was also information about environmental benefits. So how much nitrogen leaching you had saved based if you were in the local treatment about water quality, how much nitrogen oxide you had reduced if you were in the global treatment, and then both sets of information if you were in the combined treatments. And in terms of incentives, those benefits to the public society, the environmental benefits were translated into donations to a charitable organization. And now I can't remember off the top of my head what those organizations were, but they were organizations that focus on stewardship of our natural resources. So this graph shows by those different treatments, so depending on the information that you were receiving, what the difference in the final rate, so that what after you decided to purchase the nitrogen modeling tool or not, and the recommended rates of the nitrogen modeling tool. And again, farmers were making lower, on average, side dress nitrogen rates than the nitrogen modeling tool recommendation. And it was much lower. This is the impact of information. People in that local treatment that were receiving information about water quality reduced their nitrogen rates significantly more than people in the control group. And there was also a reduction in the nitrogen rates for people that received information about nitrous oxide. So our control group, that difference between the modeling tool rates and the final decision of a rate was smaller than those in our treatment group. So this is just saying information matters. This one is by round. So again, something happened in that second round. We got a little probably excited about the yield and profitability, and we made slightly different decisions in our second round than we did other rounds of the experiment, but then it kind of normalized by round 8. Except in the 8th round, the final rate that was applied was much, much lower than the recommended rate by the nitrogen modeling tool. So we took this information and again ran some regressions. That's what we love to do in economics. To look at the impact, we were particularly interested not only in the decisions and the rates, but the impact of that information. So how did the information about water quality and the information about nitrous oxide impact both rates, but also decision to purchase the tool? Because we're kind of interested in, how do you promote this nitrogen modeling tool? There was no significant difference, statistically significant difference between the nitrogen modeling tool adoption with the different information treatments, which was quite surprising to us because we thought that if Adapted, for example, were to adopt a marketing strategy that talked about water quality benefits or nitrous oxide reduction, that they might have some successful marketing with that approach. But what our research was showing was just the baseline information was enough, saying that it bases data on historical averages and weather patterns and things. That information was no different than giving environmental information about using the tool. Another way to say that is that we're just not motivated to adopt the tool based on environmental information. However, where the information was significant was particularly that local treatments about water quality benefits. The application of nitrogen significantly decreased among participants who received information about water quality compared to the control. Adoption of the tool decreased, not surprisingly, over rounds. Our participants kind of felt more confident in their own decisions or tried out the tool and then decided they could make as good of decisions or decisions based on a little bit of use of the tool. And then the rate of nitrogen application was higher in those later rounds, 2 through 8, compared to that first round. So first round out, there was kind of a conservative estimate, and then it increased over time, but still remained lower than the modeling tool recommendation. That was a little bit shorter than I hoped. I have all the numbers if you want to see the regression outputs and the factor analysis and things. This is a picture of our tuk-tuk at the University of Delaware Center for Experimental and Applied Economics. You might see that at Ag Day or different places. We love to drive this around when we're doing consumer events. It's a nice, attractive thing to get participants to come over and see what we're doing. If you have any follow-up questions, you can absolutely contact me at my information here. Yes, sir.
I noticed all your studies, you do not include New Jersey. Why is that?
That was a really good question. I think in this study, is New Jersey part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed? That would be my question. It is?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why we don't include them. That's a good recommendation.
I asked a lot of studies and include Virginia,
Yeah,
And New Jersey is just, right across.
right there,
the fence.
yeah. My guess would be networks, because we, like our funding agencies and our partners have networks in Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, but not necessarily New Jersey. So we need to tie in with Rutgers a little bit would be my answer to that.